Welcome to Lesson 7, Creating a Good Image. This is kind of a tough thing. A lot of people are curious as to what are the simple steps I can take to improve my image. That's what we're going to show you here. And even if you're experienced in Photoshop, you might want to take a look at this because things have changed, I think, pretty dramatically in Photoshop CS4, especially with what are called adjustment layers, which is what I'm going to demonstrate. So I'm going to open up these two images first of all, just a before and after, and choose 2 up so you can see it. And here you'll notice that we've got an image that's obviously not totally correct. You can see she's got red eye. Look at her skin, it's a little pink. Over here she looks much more warm, more accurate as far as skin tone. But what I do want to mention is that what a lot of people do who don't totally understand color is they look at an image and their eyes correct it for them. And they might look at this and say, yeah, she's got red eye, but the rest of the image looks pretty darn good. And what happens is you get a lot of inconsistencies because this one looks pretty darn good, and then another one might look pretty darn good, and another one might look pretty darn good. You put them all together in the same brochure, you've got a magenta cast on one, a green cast on another, and it just doesn't fit well. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how to read neutrals. Neutrals will help you to get an accurate reading on color without depending on what you visually see with your eyes, and also how to take advantage of using the curves panel. So by using the curves panel, you can do a lot of things such as adjust brightness and contrast and some of the same things that you could use levels for, but I am recommending that you use curves. Now, I'm going to go ahead and close this image up. I'm going to get rid of a little color sampler I have here that I accidentally left. And in here, I am first of all going to show you something about this image. If I choose Window, Histogram, you'll see, now I'm going to click on the yield sign to refresh this, that I have a lot of tonal values in here. If you want a little bit more information, you can use the expanded view. But you can see that I have a lot of tonal information going across here, and you'll see a lot of lines here representing each one of the tonal values. Now this information is basically showing me that this image has a pretty good graduation of color from one shade to another. But if I were to come in here, and I'm going to intentionally destroy this image just so you can see what can happen, but I'm going to come in here and choose Image, Adjustment, Posterize, set this for about a 16. Okay, look at that. All right, that's not good. And you wouldn't ever see anything this dramatic unless you went to your neighborhood office supply and bought a 16 level scanner, which I don't even know if they sell anymore. But when you would see something like this is if you went into Photoshop and you played with image adjust levels. It would go into adjustment levels, and then you went into curves, and then you went into exposure, and then you decided to brighten it up a bit. And what you're doing each time you go into each one of these items above this line is start to destroy some information. And sometimes you'll see it especially in the darker area, and then you see what's called banding, and it's just that really bad breakdown of your tonal values. So just keep an eye on your histogram as you're working. But I will tell you that even if you totally know what you're doing, as soon as you're in Photoshop and you go into the curves panel, you will be making some changes to this histogram. So keep that in mind and try to make your adjustments direct and good. I'm going to choose File, Revert, and now Control or Command 0. Okay, first thing that's absolutely driving me crazy, red eye. Take the red eye tool, which is hidden under the spot healing brush tool, and you click and drag it. Ta-da, fixed. Click and drag it. That wasn't too hard, really, was it? So, able to take advantage of cleaning that up. I'm going to just pull my histogram back, tuck it back in here. Now, next thing I'm going to do is I am going to change my eyedropper, make sure that it is set for a 3x3 average. So, I select the eyedropper tool, and I select this from the options at the top. This will allow you to sample a 3x3 average when you click on a pixel instead of perhaps accidentally picking up a stray pixel. Okay, Now, the other thing that's going to help with adjustments is the fact that I'm going to use an adjustments layer, or adjustment layer, I should say, instead of just flat out choosing image, adjustments, curves, and changing my original information. I'm going to go to the layers panel and choose, I'm going to choose curves from the new fill or adjustments layer button at the bottom of the layers panel. And it changes my adjustments panel, which is new. This panel just kind of sits here waiting for you to decide what you're going to work on. Brings up curves on here. Now this is a little different than in previous versions. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to set my highlight and shadow, which is really critical for most images to get the correct tonal value. Notice that you've got a highlight button and a shadow button, white, black, middle. These are the two we're going to set. Notice I can double click on the highlight and I can change the value. Now I've got mine set already because I leave it there, but you want to change yours to 5330. Cyan 5, magenta 3, yellow 3, black 0. This is just typical numbers that you can use if you're really good and you work for a printer, or you have really good communication with a printer and you're sending this out to press. You might want to call your press guy and say, hey, what's the minimum dot value you can hold? And then you would enter that value in here. If you're doing web stuff, stick with these values. They'll work fine. Click OK. Now, shadow. These are pretty much set based upon what you determined in your color settings. And this was reviewed in the previous video. But when I go into color settings, I can choose what CMYK I'm using. If I don't know what I'm doing, I'm just going to leave this at general purpose. Perhaps if you know you're going to print, you might want to choose pre-press, but your maximum black is pretty much determined by your color settings. Or again, if you work with a printer, they can give you the maximum black and you can enter it there. So what I want to do next is take my highlight, and I'm just going to come out here. Now, how do I find the lightest point of this image? What's really cool in this version, if you have your highlight eyedropper selected, you can hold down your Alt key and it shows you the highlight, okay, the lightest point. And then if I want to zoom in, which I probably should, I can hold down my, I can hold down the space bar and the control key, or the command key and the space bar on the Mac. But I can come in here and say, okay, this is about my lightest point right here. I hold down my shift key, voila. It simply sets a probe down there. Now I missed a little bit, so I'm going to hold down my shift key and drag it over to the light point. Now I'm going to zoom back, control minus minus minus, or of course command minus minus minus. My shadow is, let's see, I hold down my, go back here, hold down my Alt key, someplace, let's see. Now I can even come in here and slide this in. And notice that if I'm holding down my Alt or Option key, I can even move this in to find the best highlight. And maybe it's actually someplace over here. So let me kind of make this a little bit smaller area. Okay, so we'll say it's right here. So I'm holding down my Alt key, I add the Shift key, click. All right, good. Now I set these points. I say my highlight is, I'm going to zoom in so I don't miss, here. My shadow is, take my shadow, here. Okay, so I've started this. You can see there's a little bit of a difference in this image. She's lost some of that pink. She might actually look a little green at this point, but again, it's in comparison, so it's hard to tell. And this is where knowing a little bit about grays and neutrals can help. Notice I cross over this image, and you'll see that in my info palette, look up here when I cross over, it's giving me values like 143/133, 153/159, 183/177. That second set of numbers is representing the red, green, blue values as they are. Now, I'm going to come in here and go ahead and hold down my Shift key and add another probe. That way, I don't have to, see, I can come back and it still sits there. It's giving me the three values just so you understand. if you are looking at an image and there's anything in there that is gray or a shade of white, essentially is what's called a neutral. And it can be a real helpful key for you to correct colors if you have it available to you. And in this particular case, I can look at this value, and if I know that it's actually gray, which I do, I also know that when I'm working with anything that's neutral or gray, the RGB values should be exactly the same. So in other words, if I come in here to my color picker and I type in 125, tab, 25, tab 125, it makes gray. If I type in 200, 200, 200, it makes a lighter gray. Always gray, 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 gray. Cancel that. So what's wrong with this? They're not the same. So typically when I'm working in here, I'll take the middle value, 153, and I'll say, okay, this is good, this is high, this is low. I'm going to take this and choose red. I'm going to hold down my control key or command key and click on my probe. Whoops, didn't mean to do that. Oops. Let's come in here. There. Oh, you know why I did that? Because this is good. This is good that I did this. This is good I'm making mistakes in front of you. It's because I left this guy active. You have to click again to turn him off. So now if I command click on here, notice it just puts an anchor point. So control or command click on a probe when you're in a separate channel would put an anchor point in there. Now notice that when I click and drag, that value is changing. Look at this value right here. So I am going to pull it up till it's about 153. And this is a little bit of additional information that's not in the book that hopefully will be helpful to you because it's hard to describe this exactly in the book. Now blue, I go into blue. I'm going to control click on this or command click if you're on the Mac. And this time, I'm going to pull this down till it's about 153. But I'm not looking at my image at all. Not looking at my image. That's, you know, as long as you get them pretty close, that's good. Ooh, wait, where am I going? Okay, good. But notice that the image looks much better now. In fact, if I click that off and on, look. So much better. And I didn't look at the picture to make that correction. I found a gray. If you're shooting product shots, get yourself a gray card, put it outside your product, adjust your image to it, and then crop it out. Now, I'm going to take this, and since this is done on a separate layer, I just want to clean things up a little bit. I'm just going to choose to flatten this image just so I can show you one more thing before we exit out of here, and that is applying a filter. And I'm going to choose Filter, Convert for Smart Filters. Say OK, so that I can come in here and do a Sharpen, Unsharp Mask, and sharpen this image up. Now, as a default, Photoshop starts with a really bad default here. I usually bring this up to at least 150. It really depends on your subject matter. If you're doing machinery, you can go a lot higher. If you're doing any woman over 40, keep it down about 150. So, but you can choose an area here. The radius I typically keep at 1, but if you're doing large format, billboard type things, you might want to increase the radius. And all that is let me explain what this filter is doing. It is the halo that is being created around the edges here. And if you zoom in a little bit here, you'll see when I click and hold, it turns off the filter. When I release, it turns it back on. Sometimes that can get a little too obvious, so you don't want to be careful with that. Keep it subtle. Now, the most important part is the threshold. And I'm going to bring the amount way up high just so you can see this. And it's always a good idea to view at actual pixels. Ooh, boy, doesn't that look bad. But I did that intentionally. Now, threshold. Where do you want an edge determined? Right now, Photoshop is looking at every different shade or tone value and saying, hey, you know what? This pixel is just one shade off of what you are, so it must be an edge, and I'm going to put this halo around it, which makes for a very noisy picture. Notice if I change this threshold to 10, which is typically what I set this at, because if you go too far, it doesn't do any unsharp masking. Look how it smoothed this out. Now watch. 0, noisy. 10, smooth. But if something is more than 10 shades off, then it does put that little halo around it. Now I'm going to bring this down to a more reasonable amount. She's a child. She can probably go up to, maybe a 200 even, close to that. Unsharp mask is a great way to really crispen up an image, especially if you're printing, but also for the web. It brings out details and just gives it a finished look. And you can see that when I come in here, let me go back up to the history panel. You can see that here's my image completed, but look at the difference. Woo! So lots of things you can do. You might want to kind of review this a couple times until you get it, but it's a quick, easy way to color correct your images and almost works like magic.